Good evening and welcome to an all new episode of What the Friday. Now, I just want y'all to know that I cannot read very well or talk. So, this is like the fifth time I've attempted to record this episode. And before we get into tonight's episode, I just want to give you a rundown of my week. Well, most of it's funny. Pretty much all of it's kind of funny. But Sunday night, the kids and I decided we wanted Sonic for supper. So we ordered it from the app and I jumped in the car to go pick it up. Well, 3 miles down the road from my house, I get behind this long line of traffic and I'm like, what is going on? And I look around the kind of cars as we're going through a curve and I can see there are these two, 18 wheelers driving between like 20 and 40 miles per hour. I don't know if they were having like mechanical issues or what. They did have their emergency flashers on. And the thing about that highway that I was on, there's no good places to pass, especially with a line of traffic that long. But I finally came to a place that I could take an alternate route. So me and about 15 other cars took it. Now, it was a trip that should have taken me like 45 minutes top round trip. But it ended up taking me about an hour and a half. Now, the roads were clear going home, so that was that. Next morning, I got up to go pick up groceries, and I decided I should probably check the oil in the car. I popped the hood, and I raised it. And I go to reach for the thing that props up the hood, and I see something brown and fuzzy out of the corner of my right eye. It was a bat, y'all. It was this teeny tiny little cute bat. And then I look to the left, and there's a dead dragonfly laying there. And it was the biggest dragonfly I've ever seen. It was longer than the bat. Now, it was a tiny bat, but in comparison, the dragonfly was ginormous, is all I can say. Now, I kind of feel like maybe it was a sign or it meant something because maybe the universe was trying to send me a message. I don't know. Maybe it's telling me to check my oil more often so that these things don't crawl up under the hood and die. But anyway, I removed all the carcasses from underneath the hood, checked the oil, and I got on the road to get my groceries. Well, about 10 miles from Walmart. And who do you think I got behind? It was this very long line of traffic again. And when I get to where I can see what the holdup is, it says what I believe is the same trucks again, because they had the same company logo on the back of them. And they had their flashers on again. So I don't know if it's just their protocol to like drive slow with their flashers on and just hold up traffic. But it was crazy. So Tuesday was pretty normal. I stayed home though. All I did was took Nick to school and picked him up from school. But I just didn't want to risk any craziness happening. And then Wednesday rolled around and I needed to go get the oil changed in the car. So as I'm going down Newberry Highway, there's a dead skunk in the middle of the road. And I believe it was a fresh kill. But I tried to like not hit him with my own car, but I couldn't avoid it because another car was coming. And when I did hit him, I believe it reactivated his spray mechanism or whatever. Because all of a sudden it was just like filling up the car. And wanted to die at that point. But when I got home, our cat Cheddar, he has to inspect the car every time you drive it into the driveway. And this time when he inspected it, he also smelled it. And when I looked at him, he looked like he was about to gag, and the look on his face was just priceless. But anyway, fast forward to Thursday morning, I didn't hear my alarm clock go off. So, of course, Nick was late for school. It was like 8 o'clock when we woke up. And I had written him a note to take in with him explaining why he was late. And on the way to the school, he starts reading his note and he goes, "You didn't dot the I in my name." Well, all I could say was the dot is silent. He didn't think it was near as funny as I did. And I laughed all the way to the school, but, he was just annoyed. If you listened to Wednesday's episode of the Midweek Mini, you know that I talked about 2 missing people. The first one that we talked about was a 12-year-old girl from Fountain Inn, South Carolina named Madison Reynolds. Thankfully, not long after that episode aired, it was announced that she had been located and was safe. Deputies say that Madison was found on the side of the road in Greenville County after someone called authorities. There's not a whole lot of details at this point, so I don't have any other information on that case to share. I'm just glad that she was found, and I know her family is very relieved because they didn't know really where she was at. But if anything else comes from this case, I'll let you know about it on a future episode. All right, let's get tonight's episode started. I just want to say now, like I always do, that the content of this episode is a bit disturbing, so listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to What the Friday, the After Dark series presented by Mystery, Murder, and Magic. Listener discretion is advised.
Have you ever heard of the song We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel? It was released near the end of September of 1989, and among other lines from the song, it includes Children of Thalidomide. Seems like a strange lyric for a song, but the song chronicles events throughout the course of history. In 1989, I was around 16 years old, and it was probably one of those things that I heard, words in a song and just didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, or maybe it was like a misheard lyric for me, I don't know. But as the years passed, I started paying more attention to the lyrics of songs, getting the meaning of it, So when I heard that song, I knew what he was talking about because we had, briefly discussed thalidomide in school, but not in depth. Well, y'all know I yearn for knowledge, so I had to look into it. And as you can imagine, the internet back then, when I decided to look into it at that time, wasn't like it is today. I would say I was probably in my early 30s. So yeah, it was probably dial-up internet and maybe 3 websites. Probably used Ask Jeeves, remember that? But I got to thinking about it again recently, so I decided to dig more into it. So what was thalidomide? Thalidomide was a drug that was used widely in the late 1950s and early 1960s to treat nausea in pregnant women. Now, some might be saying, couldn't you just suck it up and get through the morning sickness? Well, first of all, let me tell you from personal experience, not every woman can. When I was pregnant with my oldest child, Courtney, I had morning sickness 24/7 up until the day I gave birth to her. Couldn't keep anything down. I lost some weight, and I was in the hospital receiving fluids for dehydration more than I was at home. So not everyone has mild morning sickness. So back in those days, thalidomide was like a dream come true for these poor women who were really suffering from nausea. Thalidomide was first marketed in 1956 by a German pharmaceutical company called Chemie Grunenthal, and it was marketed as an anti-flu medicine. Shortly after that, it was used as a hypnotic or sedative type drug. Because of its many uses, it was truly thought to be a miracle drug. As a matter of fact, samples of the drug, which was sold under a bunch of different names, were sent to doctors all over the world, including the United States, and they were told to give it to pregnant women for morning sickness. And those doctors were telling everyone that there was absolutely no risk associated with thalidomide for pregnant women because that's what the pharmaceutical company had told them. And in Germany, you didn't even need a prescription to get it. They were so sure it was that safe. Now, that pharma company in Germany had even handed out samples to its employees. And on Christmas Day of 1956, a baby girl was born to one of their employees, and she was born without ears. Now, at first, there was no connection between the drug and the birth defect. Dr. Frances Kelsey, she was a new doctor working with the FDA. She got the first application to review thalidomide for approval in the United States. In a New York Times video that I watched, Kelsey said that she was very uneasy about approving it. Her main concern was that it was being used so widely for morning sickness, but no one knew what effects it might have on a developing fetus. An article came out in June of 1961 that promoted the drug's use in late pregnancy. It was supposedly written by a doctor named Ray Nelson, but it didn't take long to find out that that was a complete lie and had actually been written by the medical director of Grunenthal. 6 months later, reports started pouring out of Germany and other countries. Report after report linked birth defects to the use of thalidomide. Fortunately, in the U.S., Dr. Kelsey had stalled the FDA's approval on a thalidomide for over a year, so the scale of reported incidences of birth defects caused by the drug was considerably less in the U.S. And because of this, major reforms were put into practice in the pharmaceutical industry. The birth defects, which include shortened or missing limbs, malformation of hands and fingers, missing ears, eye issues, sensory impairment, facial disfigurement, and damage to the brain, internal organs, or skeletal system were just the beginning. Many of the children born with these defects were put in homes. Their family didn't want them or couldn't take care of them. And in at least one case, one child was murdered, and they called it a mercy killing. The young mother of the child and the doctor were both charged with the mercy killing of her malformed infant. One mother said that it would be days after her baby's birth before she would get to see him. The other mothers in the maternity ward met their new bundles of joy rather quickly, but she was kept waiting, and I'm sure she was wondering what was going on. But the hospital would tell her stuff like, "You'll see him soon enough," or "He's not doing very well." But eventually a nurse told her she could see him the next day. Well, when the time came to see her baby, the nurse rolled her to see the baby in a wheelchair. Maybe she thought that the wheelchair would be the best, or would be for the best, in case the mother had a bad reaction to the sight of her baby. Now, that mother, her baby was born without arms or legs. It should also be noted that some of these babies only lived for a few hours after birth because their issues were so severe. For the families who didn't institutionalize their children, they faced an uphill battle. The biggest battle for many of them was convincing their doctors to perform amputations on what was there of the limbs so that the kids could wear prosthetics to improve their mobility and quality of life. So how could a drug with such horrible side effects be given to humans? You would think they would have to test something like that. Well, they did, but it's not like the clinical trials and such that are done today for new medications. And you have to remember, this was the 1950s, and it was also in Germany where there wasn't an FDA. The testing that the pharmaceutical company did consisted of testing the drug on rats. In some studies, rodents were given over 600 times the human dose, and the rats came out fine. But they tested it only on rodents, and not a single one of those rodents had been pregnant when they tested it. Now, can you imagine how different the outcome would have been if they had tested a pregnant rodent or on a different species? I mean, just think about how different the lives of thousands of children could have been. Now, here's where it gets worse. Otto Ambros had a heavy hand in the development of the drug. And if you don't recognize the name, I'll let you in on who he was. His medical experience, and I use those words loosely, goes back to the 1950s. Ambros was a Nazi war criminal. At the end of World War II, he was put on trial in Nuremberg, found guilty of crimes against humanity for his use of slave labor at Auschwitz III, Monowitz. He had also been charged with mass murder and a few other charges, but the slave labor was the only one that they had found him guilty of. And he only spent 5 years in prison for that war crime. Now, Ambros wasn't the only Nazi war criminal to have a hand in the drug's development. Heinrich Muchter was a German chemist, doctor, and pharmacologist who was known best for his multiple experiments on concentration camp prisoners, and many of those prisoners died from those experiments. Unlike Ambrose, though, Mukhtar would never stand trial for his crimes because he escaped Poland and went back to Germany. Now, how comforting is it that people who had indirect ties to Hitler, but ties nonetheless, advised in creating a drug that killed countless babies and caused severe health problems in those that survived? Who thought that was a good idea? After thousands, if not more, babies were severely deformed, stillborn, or died shortly after birth, thalidomide was banned worldwide in 1962. And it is believed that at least 10,000 babies were born with some type of deformity from thalidomide. And that's only the babies that made it past childbirth. It's also been estimated that somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 miscarriages were caused by the drug. When the case went to court, Grunenthal denied that any of the deformities could be blamed on thalidomide. They blamed them on everything from failed home abortions to nuclear fallout. They didn't want to take responsibility. Now, most of those cases were settled, but to this day, there's still some litigation that continues because even though they received a settlement, it wasn't enough to cover the lifelong specialized care that many of the survivors needed. Not only did Grunenthal not want to take responsibility for what their drug had caused, they also didn't issue an apology for like 50 years after the fact of what had happened. And one thing that they did find out is that it only took one 50 milligram tablet of thalidomide to cause these deformities. So you didn't have to take it for a long time. It was only one 50 milligram tablet that could cause severe deformities. But in 1964, they put thalidomide back into use again. And this time it was in Jerusalem for a patient with severe leprosy. The patient was in severe pain, and because of it, he couldn't sleep. So the doctor that was taking care of him, it was a doctor named Dr. Jacob Schieskin, he prescribed thalidomide to help the man sleep. But soon he discovered that the leprosy itself was responding positively to the drug. Then in the 90s, it was discovered that thalidomide could starve blood flow to cells, and that had the possibility of treating cancerous tumors. That discovery was made by Dr. D'Amato, but that discovery came with some apprehension because of the dangers that came with it. Yes, it could help rid humans of cancer, but at what cost? And this made the survivors of the thalidomide tragedy anxious. They had been told that the drug would never ever be used again. Well, they finally compromised. It was promised that the drug would be most restricted, or more restricted than it had been, and it would be the most restricted drug to be distributed. And women who were taking it had to submit to the pregnancy test. Since those days, it's been found that it can also be used to treat a wide variety of diseases, ranging from MS and Crohn's disease to HIV and AIDS-related illnesses. In Brazil, though, where they don't regulate and have the safety standards for medicines as they do, like they do in other parts of the world, there are still thalidomide children being born. It's used a lot there for leprosy. Now, earlier I mentioned Dr. Frances Kelsey and how she kept thalidomide from being widely used in the United States. And I think that she is like a prime example of why you should just always trust that gut instinct, your intuition, because it never lies to you. I found a few more interesting tidbits about her that I'd like to share. She continued working with the FDA until 2005, and at that time she was 91 years old. Because she was courageous in her efforts to keep the drug out of America, she received numerous awards. In 1962, she was awarded the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. The following year, she was given the Gold Key Award from the University of Chicago Medical and Biological Sciences Alumni Association. In 1994, she was chosen as the namesake for the Frances Kelsey Secondary School. In the year 2000, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, and there are many other awards that she had received over the years. Now, after she retired from the FDA, she moved from Washington, D.C. to London, Ontario with her daughter. On August the 7th, 2015, Dr. Kelsey passed away at the age of 101. She will forever be remembered for her role against thalidomide. And as Billy Joel's and as his song referenced, we didn't start the fire. No, we didn't light it, but we tried to fight it. I would say that Dr. Kelsey fought it and won. And it's appalling to me that so many babies had to die or be born with so many deformities before someone finally said, hey, we think this drug is causing it and we need to stop prescribing it. It makes me wonder how many people had to die before they realized there was a cancer-causing agent in a popular weed killer. I mean, you're all time seeing these commercials on TV that if you or your family or loved one has been affected by blah, 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 you see this on TV all the time. So it just makes you wonder. But anyway, that's really all I have for tonight's episode. Come back in the morning for an all-new Weekend Weird Files.